Right. So I'm here with Jesse Brooks. He's the creator and manager of the Instagram meme account Sein, and he is the host of a podcast titled The Other Side of Darkness. How are you doing, Jesse?
I am doing great, Chuang. As I said before we started, it's bright and early, not even really bright here yet, here where I am in Atlanta. But good evening to you.
Awesome. Yeah, I was going to ask you to do a David Lynch style weather report, but since you've already done it, I
Yeah, I would
understand.
need to tilt my webcam so that it's looking right up at me, and I need some big sunglasses.
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, so I understand it's 6:30 in the morning for you, but you've already
Hmm.
explained that you're an early bird, which I'm not. So now that we have established that, I would
Uh-huh.
like to remind everyone that today is February the 23rd for me, and I assume it's the same for you. And
Hmm.
I rewatched the pilot episode of Twin Peaks a few days ago. I was going to introduce my brother to it, but he didn't like it. And that day was, at least in the context of the pilot, is the last entry of Laura Palmer's diary.
That's right.
There we go.
Wow.
So I want to begin by asking how you got started. How did you get introduced to the two respective shows that you've somehow mashed together in your fabulous Instagram account, Seinfeld and Twin Peaks?
Oh man, that's a good question. Thank you. So I am a lifelong fan of the show Seinfeld. I was actually born the same day that the second episode aired
Oh,
for the first
wow.
time on NBC. So
Mhm.
May 31st, 1990.
Mhm.
And yeah. So it was destiny. I grew up watching Seinfeld. Didn't really, I mean, I was a kid when it was on, so I wasn't, 5 years old watching the contest or anything like that, but watched a couple episodes live and really got into it. In the early 2000s, the show was syndicated and played on a channel called TBS. Um, so every afternoon I would come home from high school and sit down and watch like an hour straight. Wound up watching all 180 episodes eventually. Got
Mhm.
some DVDs along the way, and I mean, just stayed a lifelong fan of it. Twin Peaks I didn't get into until I was an adult. It's friends had recommended it to me, but I'd never given it the time because you have to like actively seek out Twin Peaks. At least you did before it was on Netflix. It wasn't one that was played heavily in syndication in its first two seasons. So I got into it in 2017 when The Return aired, the
Yeah.
third season. And my coworkers would come in every Monday morning talking about how crazy the last night's episode was. And I had never seen any of the show. So I decided to give it a shot. My wife was pregnant at the time. We were expecting our first child. So, life had slowed down a lot at home because we were doing a lot of resting. So I
Mhm.
had some time on my hands and binged the first two seasons within a few weeks
Mhm.
on Netflix, and then sought out the film Firewalk with Me, watched that right after, and dove straight into The Return. Got a Showtime account specifically to watch The Return. So blew through that and have been a fan ever since. So it's been 5 years now of being obsessed with Twin Peaks, but 30, 31, coming on 32 years for Seinfeld.
Awesome. So I recently left Canada. I studied there, and I went back to Vietnam, and I haven't watched Seinfeld. I don't grow up watching Seinfeld. I've only started watching Seinfeld when they announced that the whole series is coming onto Netflix.
Right.
But I know of Jerry Seinfeld long before watching it because he wrote and provided the voiceover in this one movie. That
B movie.
Yep, that one movie
Yeah.
where it says that bees cannot fly or something.
Yeah.
But I started watching Twin Peaks maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and I binged the first and the second season, and then the return, and then the movie. And
Hmm.
it's so for those who are not in the know, can you describe what that show is?
Oh, that's a difficult question
That's why I
because
ask
it's a
it.
very, yeah, it's a very surreal show. David Lynch is, I think, definitely follows in the tradition of surrealism and absurdism. It's on the surface level, it's a murder mystery.
Yeah.
The beginning, the show starts out, a high school student is found dead in a small town in Washington. Um, it is tied to a couple, it's tied to a recent murder and another missing girl. So the FBI is called in to investigate. Enter Special Agent Dale Cooper, one of the greatest characters in all of TV history, in my opinion. And it follows for the first season and a half, the FBI trying to figure out who killed this girl, and navigate like this underground world of drug smuggling and all this stuff. But below the surface, it's very much supernatural, abstract, existential kind of horror, because there's all this spiritual stuff going on, with this parallel world called the Black Lodge, these evil spirits that inhabit it, that interact with our world in various ways. There's a lot of mysticism and mythology involved in the show. It was something that did not happen on TV at the time. So that's kind of what that show is about. Following Dale Cooper, trying to crack the case, and being sucked up into this weird mystery world in the process.
There we go. I've been a fan of David Lynch, who was one of the co-creators for a long
Mhm.
time before starting Twin Peaks. The first film I watched from him is Eraserhead, which I
Mm,
believe he did his own
me too.
music.
Yes, yeah, he did his own music and sound design for that. That was his first feature length project.
Mhm. And of course, Special Agent Dale Cooper, the role is played by Kyle MacLachlan, which the two first collaborated in the film Blue Velvet,
Yep.
where a new musical composer is introduced, Angelo Balametti.
Yes. Oh,
Yes,
I love him.
yeah, he's incredible. Um, so what I discovered in Twin Peaks, as well as a recurring theme in Lynch's films, I think the order in which I watched it before finally getting into Twin Peaks was Eraserhead, Mulholland Drive, and Blue Velvet, and then the show. So the recurring theme in Lynch's, I guess, artistic creations is that there's the very much pristine uh, surface, almost utopian, and then there's the underworld, which is messy and troubled and yucky and evil in a way. I'm reminded of this
Mhm.
shot as the opening of Blue Velvet, where it
Yes.
shows this suburban garden, and then the camera pans down to reveal this like bug infested underground, and it basically opens the movie nicely.
Yeah. Oh, I love it.
So I mean, of course, more people know of Seinfeld more than Twin Peaks. I mean, I would describe it as a show about nothing, but
Mhm.
this may come as a surprise to you, but not many Vietnamese people know about Seinfeld.
Wow. Yeah. I knew it was syndicated all around the world. I wasn't sure the extent to which it was popular in other countries.
Mhm. Yeah, it's how would you rank Seinfeld in the I guess the rankings of sitcoms you've watched?
Sitcoms, it's number one for me,
Cool.
simply because of um, certain methods of storytelling that it kind of pioneered in television, taboos that it broke, ways that it innovated. There's definitely a post Seinfeld world in terms of American television, things that you can talk about on TV that you could not talk about in the 80s,
Mhm.
because they were intentional about breaking barriers in some ways. And it wasn't, by no means like a progressive break,
Mhm.
special topics kind of show, but it made things like common to talk about, that you just wouldn't talk about on TV before. And the quality of writing on that
Mhm.
show, I think, surpassed everything around it at the time, and has inspired so many of the great shows since, in terms of fantastic comedies. I don't know if It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia
Oh
is
yeah.
popular. Yeah.
Well, it isn't, but I know of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those shows. I mean, it's probably got a kind of a distinctly American sense of humor, especially because it's so heavily based in the
Mhm.
city of Philadelphia. I've never been there, but that show definitely owes a lot to the writers of Seinfeld, and a lot of the comedy that's come out of HBO. Not just Larry David, but the show Veep as well,
Yeah,
about the vice president played by Julia Louis-Dreyfus.
Elaine.
Um, Yep, the Great Elaine, and I think it was so influential in everything that has come since. To me, it's number one, and it's just got a soft place in my heart just for sentimental reasons too.
Mhm. I've heard I think I've heard Jerry he said that the what's distinctively new about Seinfeld is not the stand-up routine that he did before uh, the show begins, or the fact that it's about the everyday minutia of life, but what's new, what he thought it was new, was the fact that there are certain stories and situations, and they do not come to a conclusion, not even a fruitful conclusion. The episode just ends. And what
Yeah,
I like about Mr. Seinfeld is that he aims to be funny and only funny. I think it was Larry David who coined the term. Was it no hugs, no moral?
no hugging, no learning.
Yes, right.
Yeah, but same concept.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Uh,
they weren't aiming to solve problems or give you warm and snuggly feelings at the end of each episode. Definitely not.
mhm. So I I think I prefer the show Curb Your Enthusiasm to Seinfeld,
Hmm.
mainly because I have a I have a I relate a bit too unhealthily to Larry David and his situation.
Sure.
And as I watch the show Curb Your Enthusiasm, and I know what Larry David looks like, I would do this. I would play this little games with myself where I go back to the Seinfeld episodes and I would discover the uncredited Larry David cameos.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there were a lot of them. Some of them were just voice, like he would just,
Yeah,
contribute his voice to certain scenes, but he also appeared as Frank Costanza's lawyer.
yeah.
He
The man
played
with a
like a
cape. The
yes,
man
the
with a
man with the
cape.
cape, the bodega cashier
Hmm.
that takes George's money.
Hmm.
There were a couple of others where he actually appears on screen. Oh, and my favorite is in the fake movie Flaming Globes of Sigmund that Jerry is
Yes.
watching when he wakes up in the middle of the night and he's like screaming to the sky.
The
It's great.
fire.
Yeah. Flaming globes.
Okay, uh, so about the connection between Twin Peaks and Jerry Seinfeld, which I would like to ask you how you managed to find some sort of common ground between the two shows. I mean, some of the obvious, the characteristics stands out. There are these two actresses, Warren Frost and Grace Zabriskie. They
Yes.
played Susan's mother,
Hmm.
parents, sorry, George's fiance's parents in Seinfeld, and the two of them played, I guess it was Donna's father and Laura's mother in the
Yep.
Twin Peaks show. And I know that the actress Brenda Strong, who played the braless Wonder, appeared
Yes. Sue
in
Ann Malishki.
in the in some episodes of Twin Peaks. And I know that Jerry Seinfeld likes transcendental meditation, which is what
Yep.
Lynch popularized. But what connections do you make between the two shows?
Well, it's it's kind of hard to explain. To me, it's like the only two shows that can really be combined the way that I combine them. I mean, there are a lot of other really successful shows that you can mash up together and do some really fantastic stuff with.
Mhm.
But there's some that just won't work. Like it's because they're very high quality shows.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't take a run of the mill sitcom that was canceled after one season, that didn't have a lot of hard work put into it, and mash it up with a show like Twin Peaks. Um, the connections are just based on the caliber of the writing for sure. They were both, I think, at the top of their genres on TV in the 90s. Um, have both had a sort of a cult following in the years since, and are just smart shows. They're smart shows that like take their stories seriously, and but not too seriously. They're not afraid to kind of have fun and make fun of their characters a little bit, and do some stuff like that. But they put the work in, like they didn't really phone it in at all. So that was kind of that's why they work so well together. I just started putting them together because that's what people did in the internet groups that I was in at the time. They would just mash shows together to make silly memes.
Hmm.
So I tried it with Seinfeld and Twin Peaks. It worked well. I made an Instagram page, and I mean, it took like a couple of years, but it built a following. Um, and it's you mentioned Grace Zabriskie, Warren Frost, and Brenda Strong. There are actually 13 total actors that
Hmm.
appeared on both shows.
Oh,
Over,
wow.
but if you count the movie, if you count Fire Walk with Me,
Yeah.
and oh gosh, some of the others, of course, Brenda Strong, Molly Shannon,
Oh,
who was on
boy.
Saturday Night Live, appeared in one or two episodes of Twin Peaks. I think she was the social worker that works with Lucy and Andy,
Oh, okay.
about has something to do with Lucy's baby, when Lucy's sister comes to town. It's from season 2. I haven't seen those episodes in a long time. The actor that plays Mr. Pitt, Elaine's boss on Seinfeld,
Oh,
was
nice.
the insurance. I want to say like the insurance salesman that sells Shelley and Bobby the wheelchair when Leo is in a coma
Yeah.
on Twin Peaks. So there's a lot of like random one-off
Mhm.
appearances by these actors, and I think that's just because they were successful character actors in Hollywood at the time, so they were getting a lot of work on TV. But that's one of the fun connections for me, is spotting all the actors that appeared in both shows.
Mhm. If I think the Twin Peaks: The Return would be my favorite movie. Like it's one of my favorite. It's definitely my favorite 18-hour movie. I mean,
Me too. Yeah.
I've watched the show and I mean I've deliberately taken leave of it just for like a couple of months so that I could be sort of reintroduced to it. Unlike for some fans, 25 or so years.
Hmm.
And I rewatch it and I thought, my God, he really pushed the envelope on that one.
Oh yeah.
Everything is just so intriguing, and you thought that the mystery has been solved when they finally found out who Laura Palmer's killer is, but they just keep peeling and peeling the layers. And I guess I should issue a spoiler warning here, but my favorite aspect of that
Yeah.
show is Dale Cooper, or no, Kyle MacLachlan playing Dougie, and
Yeah.
it's such a he's such a character. He's such a
Oh my
character.
gosh. It was such a wild experience. I've talked to so many people that, I mean, you don't know what to expect when you start season 3 of Twin Peaks. And it's nothing like the first 2 seasons, other than it contains the same characters and it follows the same, in the same world. I mean, Dougie Jones, that was completely out of left field, to spend so much time with that very strange character. I mean, both him and Mr. C,
Yeah,
Cooper's doppelganger,
the
come to
evil
life.
Dale.
Oh man, that was such a treat. I mean, it was challenging
Mhm.
watching at times. I mean, I felt at certain times that it was almost like I almost felt like David Lynch was like trying to see how far he could get you to stay engaged with it.
Mhm.
Because sometimes it was, I mean, especially like there's a scene where there's just someone sweeping the floor at the bar for like 3 minutes straight and music playing in the background. And that's all it was. Nothing else happened in that shot. Um, and it was very experimental. I think it totally paid off. But yeah, Dougie Jones was a crazy interesting part of that.
My favorite episode of that show must have been, I think it was part 6 or part 7, where I think was it, there's this guy that says got a light, right?
Yes,
And I
part
wonder,
8.
oh, okay. And I wonder, what does that have to do with the entire, season as it progressed? I mean, it was taken a very different time and different place and different people.
Yeah, that was I mean, like one of the most surprising moments in TV is when I mean, the episode starts out like a normal episode, like following the story, Mr. C, and I think he's in the truck with Ray, and Ray tries to kill him.
Hmm.
Um, and then it just like cuts and flashes back 80 years earlier
Mhm.
with the atom bomb explosion in White Plains, New Mexico. It's the connection. I mean, it almost felt like Lynch was like, okay, I want to take a minute to do like a little abstract origin story to kind of explain without explaining, because he doesn't like to explain stuff, and I don't blame him. But kind of explain like how this evil started seeping into the world and where the Black Lodge came from, and how these characters, these sort of White Lodge spiritual characters like the giant, how they figure into everything. I thought it was really cool. And that God of Light guy, the woodsman. There's so many theories. Have you read some of the theories on the internet about where these woodsmen came from?
Um, I have not, but do share with me some.
So from what I understand, and I can't remember because I read Mark Frost's books,
Okay.
the final dossier and the secret history of Twin Peaks, and I think he explains it a little bit, or he at least hints at it that well, this wouldn't explain, it wouldn't go back that far because the woodsmen were in the 40 flashback episode. But the log lady, her husband died in a fire.
Yeah.
He was a logger or something like that. And that's where her log came from.
Oh, right.
But
Yeah.
the idea, I think, was that these were coal miners or loggers or something like that that maybe died in some kind of accident, maybe related to the sawmill and all the lumber work that was happening in Twin Peaks. And that had something to do with their nature because they're kind of evil, like they're kind of scary. And of course, they appear in the room above the convenience store in Fire Walk with Me.
Mhm.
Um, I think that's kind of the theory behind it, like because they appear in the convenience store in that episode and party, like in that weird time lapse
Yeah.
shot where they're all inside the store, appearing and disappearing and all this stuff. I don't know. I can't make heads or tails of it, but it was pretty cool.
Yeah. It's all coming back to me. I mean, I watched
Yeah,
this show like a long time ago, and I just remember these
me
things.
too. Yeah.
So back to Seinfeld. Who's your favorite Seinfeld side character?
Side character is probably either Jackie Chiles or Jay Peterman
Oh, right.
because they're both such larger than life characters with
Mhm,
really loud personalities.
mhm. I'm a Tim Watley guy. A
Oh, I love
shtickle,
Wally.
a
Yeah.
shtickle fluoride. That
Yeah.
guy.
I'm just a sadist with newer magazines. Oh man, you can't beat Bryan Cranston. I mean, you saw hints of his later Breaking Bad Heisenberg character in some of those scenes on Seinfeld, I think.
Hmm. There you go. So the music of both shows, I know that the composer of Seinfeld, at least the theme song, I don't know if the entire music score was Jonathan Wolf,
Yes,
and
Jonathan Wolf.
you had a conversation with him, and I'm
Hmm.
guessing as a fan, you would probably have geeked out a lot about it.
Oh yeah, I had a hard time staying professional in that in the interview. I did two interviews with Jonathan. One was for my other podcast. I have a parenting podcast, and I talked to him about fatherhood and
Oh,
being a dad. He has like 5 kids.
oh boy.
And then yeah, so I did that in 2020, and then last year I brought him back because last year Warner Brothers Records released the Seinfeld soundtrack
Mhm,
on CD for the first time, or CD. Really, it's all digital these days.
mhm.
But so we talked a lot about the music of Seinfeld. So yeah, he did the main theme, but also the individual cues for every episode, and he did them fresh for every episode too. They didn't just recycle music, which was really really cool to think about that for 180 episodes.
What kind of what trivia did he share with you that most surprised you?
Oh man, let me think. My favorite was well, this wasn't a trivia moment, but it was talking about um the Jerry pilot. So in season
Mhm.
4 of Seinfeld, of course, Jerry and
Right.
George get hired by NBC to write a pilot,
Mhm.
and they
Jerry.
fully produce it. Like you see the whole thing, and you hear like the really cheesy music. The theme music for that fake pilot is nothing like the music of Seinfeld. And I talked to Jonathan about that, like where did that come from? he said, well, I just talked to one of the writers, Larry Charles, who said,
Mhm.
we're going to need some theme music for the show. Just make something up, make something cheesy and schlocky and, typical cliche 90s theme music. And what was cool is that Jonathan Wolf, I mean, he had done a lot of other shows before Seinfeld. He's done like over 100 shows. I think somewhere around 100 shows. And so he didn't borrow from any of those shows, but like he knew how to write like a more by the numbers kind of
Yeah.
theme music. And I asked him, I was like, well, it kind of sounds lyrical. Did you ever have lyrics for the theme music? He said no, but then he just made them up on the spot during our interview. He like did a little improvised singing session along to the music. So that was a lot of fun.
Wow. My favorite Seinfeld music moment, aside from obviously the bass theme, is
Yeah.
the the musical cues used in the episode Bizarro Jerry, where
Yes.
Elaine meets the bizarro counterparts of her
Yep.
buddies, Jerry, George, and Kramer. And there are these musical cues when the exterior is like the bizarro apartment. And I love the bizarro apartment's like interior design, which is like the
Complete
exact
reverse.
opposite of Jerry's apartment.
Yeah.
And it has this like really like wonky sort of like bass line, and I just it's just fantastic.
Yeah, and it almost sounds a little like it's playing backwards with
Oh yeah.
the percussion behind it. I
Mhm.
think he did kind of do a little backmasking. Um yeah, I mean genius stuff. I mean every episode had fantastic music. And he knew even like when they changed their setting and went to another setting to change the music. Like when they did the episode The Betrayal, when Elaine is invited to Sue Ellen's wedding in India. He did a more traditional Indian music kind of influence theme with
Right.
sitars and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And when they did fake movies on Seinfeld, he would write the scores for those movies and, borrow from like, I don't know, Hans Zimmer and James Horner and, John Williams and all these great composers. Yeah, he knew what he was doing.
Mhm. Yeah. So I watched the film Memento a few years back, and
Yes.
I was really amazed by it. But then I
Yeah.
found out that there's that episode, The Betrayal, that basically you know beat them to it. You know, they
Yeah,
sort of
definitely.
like
Yeah.
invented the concept firsthand.
Yeah, and I think The Betrayal was based on a play of the same name, and
Oh, really?
I haven't seen it. I know that the writer David Mandel has talked about that play, but I don't know if it has a backward structure like that. I mean, of course, Tarantino had been doing that for 10 years at that point. Telling stories out of order. But yeah, definitely, it does have a Memento feel to it, which is funny because I think Christopher Nolan, who directed Memento, like owes um, a lot of his prestige to the work of David Lynch, who I think influenced him a lot.
There we go. So Angelo Badalamenti is like I think he's the reason why I started seeking out music scores.
Uh huh.
Uh, mainly because of his work in Twin Peaks, and it goes so well with the show as a whole because my first impression of it is that, well, yes, it's a murder mystery, but it has elements of soap opera and the supernatural.
Mm-hmm.
It's comedic, dramatic, eerie, thrilling, and in in some cases horrifying. And
Yep.
Badalamenti's music is this eclectic mix of sounds and music that I didn't think was fitting before. Like he would do jazz and dream
Yep.
pop and
Mm-hmm.
even sometimes really whimsical tunes like the Audrey's dance theme, which is
Yeah. Yeah. Oh gosh, that's a crazy one.
Mhm. Yeah. So have what's your favorite Badalamenti score besides from the Twin Peaks one?
Oh man. Um, it's hard to say. I mean, I loved his work in Blue Velvet.
Mhm.
Um, I'm trying to recall what all he had done with Lynch because there were a couple of Lynch's films that he did not use Badalamenti on. Lost Highway, he was
Yeah.
not
Oh, right.
involved. Mulholland Drive, I think he did the music for and was incredible. Um, I mean, this is not my favorite work of his, but fun fact: Angelo Balametti did the music for National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation,
Wow.
the great '80s comedy with Chevy Chase.
Hmm.
But I would say outside of Twin Peaks, probably Mulholland Drive.
Yeah. Another crazy musical fact that I found is, have you watched this film with Vanilla Ice called Coolest Ice?
I have not, but I'm aware of it.
So, apparently the DP, director of photography for that movie, he went on to do a series of films for Steven Spielberg, including Schindler's List. His
No
name is
kidding.
Janusz Kaminski. He's Polish. So,
Wow, I did not know that.
yeah.
That's hilarious. I thought you were going to say that it was Peter Deming, who is a frequent collaborator of Lynch's, who did Lost Highway, a lot of Twin Peaks, maybe all of Twin Peaks, I'm not sure. But he also did Austin Powers, at least the first Austin Powers film,
Mhm.
the same year that he did Lost Highway. So he's another one of those directors of photography that can really jump genres and you know, do whatever he wants.
Oh yeah, I'm a fan of Deming as well. Um,
Yeah.
so in the return, the 18-part series, there's at the end of the episode, there's always a in Twin Peaks, there's this location called the Roadhouse, which is a bar.
Yes.
And in the pilot episode, we see Julie Cruz performing
Mm-hmm.
a lyrical version of the Twin Peaks theme.
Yep.
But in the return, there it features like a slew of like artists of many different genres performing. I know that Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross did it,
Yep.
and so did Chromatics.
Mm-hmm.
And
And Eddie Vedder,
mhm. Oh right, yeah.
which I didn't realize that was him for the first time because he the host J.R. Starr introduces him as Edward Louis Severson, which is I think his birth name. And
Wow.
I didn't know that. I didn't recognize him for some reason. I mean, once you know that it's Eddie Vedder, you can, and you hear his voice, you know that it's him. But I was like, oh my god, that's Eddie Vedder.
I know that Julie Cruz herself reprised that, yeah, the theme, and I think
Yep.
it was towards the end of the
Part 17.
yeah, part
Yep.
17.
Yep. The last one. It was, I think it was, oh God, and it was so impactful because it was after Cooper had somehow managed to go back in
Oh
time through
yeah.
the basement and thought he saved Laura.
Mhm.
And then she ends up being snapped up and, you know, snatched away by Judy or whatever,
Mhm.
and disappears. And then it like fades to the Roadhouse and Julie Cruz singing. It was, oh man, that was a moment for me emotionally.
Mhm. And I know that the two musicians who starred in Fire Walk with Me are Chris Isaac,
Yes.
of that song Wicked Games, and
Mm-hmm.
David Bowie, whose character was returned in the return, but as a boiling kettle.
Yeah. Voiced by someone else,
Mhm.
unfortunately, due to Bowie's death. I think the year before they started filming that.
Mhm. Um, I wonder, what's your take on that character, Philip Jeffries? He
Oh,
appeared in one scene, and then he appeared as a kettle. So what's up with that?
right. Okay, so really, really difficult to say. But I think that Philip Jeffries came closer to figuring out like what was going on
Oh,
than anyone else on that show. And I think that's why he got sucked up into that world. You know, he appears at the FBI field office in Philadelphia and Fire Walk with Me, and then disappears again. There are deleted scenes that appear in the missing pieces that actually show him in Argentina at the hotel, and he walks up to the front desk and he asks to see a young lady named Judy. And they say that like she's here,
right.
she's waiting for you, something like that. And then there's another scene where he like suddenly appears in front of like a giant burned spot on the wall. Like he's been through a very painful journey somehow to wind up back in Argentina. And then, of course, he appears again in the return as the kettle. And then there's that scene where Mr. C is like trying to talk to him,
Mhm.
like on the phone, that weird phone computer thing that he
Yeah.
has. And he's like, is it Philip Jeffries? Is that you? Which theory, just conspiracy theory of mine. I think
Okay.
the person he was talking to was actually Sarah Palmer,
Okay.
and I have reasons for that, but I won't get into that right now. But yeah, I think that the same thing that happened to Chris Isaac's character, Chet Desmond. I think that he starts to uncover what's going on with like the Black Lodge and all this negative energy that's seeping into the world, and gets sucked up by it and consumed by it, and winds up stuck in that world. And I think maybe the kettle is like the only way that he's able to get out of it. I mean, in the same way that like Dale Cooper drops through the floor of the Black Lodge and winds up back in the real world in the body of Dougie Jones, or
Dougie.
maybe it's his body. I don't know exactly how that worked, because I know that the real Dougie then got transported to the Black Lodge. So I don't know exactly how that worked, but I think that's kind of what happened. I think the Black Lodge, it takes a person in and then spits them back out in a totally different form.
Yeah.
And I think honestly, because Lynch is so influenced by certain aspects of like Buddhist mythology.
Yeah.
And he kind of wears that on his sleeve, like, you know, even like Dale Cooper being obsessed with Tibet and the Tibetan Book of the Dead and Tibetan Buddhism and things like that. I think that he's drawing parallels to certain aspects of life cycles and karma and things like that. Stuff that I don't understand well enough to speak to, but I think that that's kind of what he's trying to get at, is that these people are going through these karmic journeys, and sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. And that happens to be what happens to Philip Jeffries. For some reason, he winds up coming back as trapped in this weird machine.
Mm-hmm. Well, I I don't know if you've watched David Lynch Masterclass. He did a
I have not.
Masterclass series, and I watched
Mhm.
it, and I remember distinctively liking it. He talked about his experiences making these movies and doing these artworks and composing sounds. And one of the stories that I was impressed by was how he managed to bring back Dennis Hopper from basically career hell. And
Yeah.
oh boy, and when I saw, I mean, Hopper's character in Blue Velvet was just a
Um,
manifestation of evil.
oh my God, amazing, amazing performance. I mean, you know, like how uncomfortable you are watching his character is a testament to how great of a job he did bringing that like evil soul to life.
Mhm. And I mean, I have my speculations, but if it's confirmed, I have no doubt that the character was based on, I mean, Dennis Hopper's, himself. I mean, the troubles that he was in, and all of the weird vices that he has got himself involved in, and it's yeah.
I'm sure a lot of that came through. If it wasn't in the writing, it was probably one of those things that probably came through in the process. I think Lynch is one of those directors that's kind of intuitive and kind of just lets the process happen. So, you know, it may have been that once he cast Dennis Hopper, because I know he really wanted to get Dennis Hopper from what I remember, and it was maybe difficult to get him. Um, and, you know, they probably worked together on creating Frank Booth
Yeah.
and
Oh,
probably
right.
drawing on a lot of those experiences. And I think the same thing probably happened with Robert Blake in
Mhm.
Lost Highway. I don't know how much of that Lynch was involved in, because of course Robert Blake plays the mystery man, this like really creepy, mysterious, violent figure.
Mhm.
And Robert Blake would then go on
Yeah.
to murder
On
his wife in
trial.
real life.
Yeah.
And of course, Lost Highway was based so much on the O.J. Simpson case,
Right.
from what I've heard Lynch say. So yeah, he definitely likes to work in elements of the real world in his films.
Oh yeah. There's that schizophrenic jazz playing scene, which
Yes.
bringing back memories. And of course, I know that Marilyn Manson appeared in that movie too. So there's
Yeah.
a music fact for you. Yeah, it's just breathtaking.
Hmm.
So which of the two shows do you think would be or is more influential?
More influential on me, or just like on the world?
Well, on you and in general.
Gotcha. I mean, I think it's really difficult to say because Twin Peaks is one of those shows that if you were to take a poll of just a random room of 1,000 people, maybe 25 to 50 of them would say that they've actively watched Twin Peaks, and the rest of them would say, yeah, I've heard of it. But it's one of those shows that influenced filmmakers and television creators. I mean, widespread. It really changed television, the way that it did things. Influenced everything from like the X-Files to Lost, to I mean, Fringe. So many of these like mystery shows, Joss Whedon's television stuff, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, all of these like supernatural shows
Yeah.
that weren't really coming up before Twin Peaks, like definitely came up afterwards. And I mean, the film world, I mean, everything from, like I mentioned, Christopher Nolan. I mean, even Star Wars, the last, second to last one, the last Jedi, I think that was the one, had some like major Lynch undertones in a couple of scenes. So definitely influential in terms of the creative world of Hollywood, but maybe not as well known outside of that. Seinfeld, I think, is influential in worldwide pop culture in the years since. I mean, not just the things we talk about and the things we're comfortable talking about in mixed company.
Mhm.
One example of that being the episode where Elaine discusses birth control and
Yeah.
having a diaphragm, which I think is not as widely talked about today as it was in the 90s, but just talks about it with the guys. And that was something that was not seen on TV before that. So they kind of broke barriers like that. But like terminology, we say things like yada, yada, yada now. Not that there's anything wrong with that. You got to see the baby, maybe the dingo ate your baby, all of these phrases. That are just completely infiltrated into pop culture these days, and just the words that we use, sometimes not even realizing that they came from Seinfeld or were popularized by Seinfeld. So I think that it was a pop culture event that, I mean, people smarter than me have written, I'm sure, dissertations on the phenomenon of Seinfeld and the way that it changed the way we talk, at least in the United States where it was so popular, but certainly probably other parts of the world too. So I think probably that's how I would break that down. Like Twin Peaks, definitely more influential in how film and television is created. Seinfeld, just on everybody.
Yeah, culturally. I think my personal take on it, and again, I couldn't have put it better myself, what you've said, is that I think there will be shows like Seinfeld. I think Louis by Louis C.K. is one example,
Yep.
but I don't think there will ever be a show like Twin Peaks, even though other shows are influenced by or even try to copy the show. There will
Yeah.
never be a show like Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
So,
Fully agree.
so let's talk about your podcast, The Other Side of Darkness, an
Sure.
episodic Seinfeld parody inspired by David Lynch. Of course, that the title itself is a Seinfeld reference. It's based on a fictional movie in which a woman goes into a coma and then wakes up
Yeah.
in the first 30 minutes of the movie, apparently, right?
Yeah. Yeah, something like that. It's that episode where Kramer, I think, he's afraid that he's going to go into a coma, and like, I don't have a living will, and he like starts freaking out after he watches the movie. Yeah, that's where that came from.
Yeah. So, yeah, about that podcast. So, how was it established, and what do you do other than interviewing the music guy for Seinfeld and the Twin Peaks guest star Sarah Paxton?
Sure. Yeah. So that came about during lockdown, during the first lockdown here in the
Mhm.
United States. I was in a cabin with my family. We were taking a little vacation on a lake. We'd rented a lake house. And late one night, I was up on my phone and I just started writing. I was like, hey, what if Jerry Seinfeld stand up, like, what if there was one that was written by David Lynch? What would that sound like? And so I just wrote out like a Lynchian stand up set, which wound up being the first scene of the podcast. And I posted, like, I screenshotted it on my Google Docs app and posted it on my Instagram story, and people started replying to it like, this is great. Let's see more. Let's see a full episode kind of thing. And so I just started writing like scene after scene. of a David Lynch story in the Seinfeld world. And almost every day I would write a scene, I would post it, people would comment on it, and I started weaving the story, and it took about
Ooh.
6 months to finish.
Mhm.
And so by December of 2020, I had finished the story, more or less, because it wasn't really finished. I went back and did a lot more, and I'm still doing a lot more. But once I finished it, people started saying, okay, well, let's hear like a table read version of this. Let's hear what it would sound like.
Mhm.
And some people started saying, I could do a good Jerry impression. Like, let's bring this to life. And I wound up casting actors. I did a Kickstarter budget because I don't have enough money to pay people to do this, and I didn't want to ask people to do it for free. And wound up like hiring musicians to write music for it. And yeah, now it's going to probably be like a 10 episode series, like in 30-minute installments, following this weird David Lynchish story,
Mhm.
Lynchian, I guess is the
Mhm.
correct term, with Jerry, George, Elaine, and Kramer. And yeah. So I wrote that, recording it, editing it now. And to kind of fill time between episodes, I've been interviewing anyone I can get my hands on. Mostly it's been actors who have appeared on Seinfeld,
Mhm.
um, and sometimes actors who have appeared on Twin Peaks. I spoke to Sarah Paxton, you mentioned, who was in part 4 of The Return. I got to talk to Alicia Witt, who played Gerson Hayward in the original series and The Return. And one actor, John Apicella, who played Evelyn. What is her last name in Twin Peaks? James's
Um,
little love affair in
Love
season
Affair.
2. Yeah, Evelyn's husband.
Oh,
He played Evelyn's husband on Twin Peaks, but he also played a repairman on Seinfeld. He was one of
oh,
the 13 actors who appeared in both shows. So I got to have a really
okay.
cool conversation with him. And fun fact, Marsh, that was his name, Jeffrey Marsh.
Yeah.
He actually shot a scene in Lost Highway.
Oh,
He told me about this. It's a deleted scene, and the deleted scenes for that movie have never been released. But he played, I think, a chaplain at the prison where Bill Pullman's character was, I think, going to go to the electric chair or something like that before he has that like psychotic break
right.
and
Yeah.
becomes Balthazar Getty's character.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, he shot a scene. David Lynch called him like 6 months later to invite him to the premiere and said, by the way, I'm sorry I had to cut your scene. Maybe we'll put it on a DVD one day.
Oh,
And
okay.
it just never surfaced. So I'm hoping to find that one day.
There we go. Yeah. So you've recorded the story of the other side of darkness, and so when do you think it will be released?
Well, part 1 is out. I released part 1 back in December.
Okay.
And part 2, I'm putting the finishing touches on. I'm hoping to have it out in the next 2 weeks. I'm just waiting on a couple more lines to be recorded. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm writing, recording, editing, releasing, because I didn't want to have to sit on this thing. And it's so big.
Hmm.
I thought I was going to be able to do it all at once, but I'm just not. It's a lot. And
Yeah.
I also have a full-time job and a family and stuff. So I'm having to like kind of parse my time out. But I've got 7 more episodes as it currently stands, as the way I've currently broken it down. Because when I finished writing it, it was like 180 pages,
Hmm.
which in the film world would be a 3-hour long film.
Yeah.
But as I started breaking it up into episodes, I realized, well, you can't just end it right there at that scene, because that doesn't work well as a standalone episode, as a good story. So I would write more scenes and move some scenes around, and it has just gotten longer and longer as a result, which is fine, I think, because I'm able to like write scenes with characters that didn't appear in it originally. I've got a scene coming up in the next episode between Newman and the character Fred Yerkes, who he only appeared in one episode of Seinfeld. He was played by Fred Stoller, who's a TV writer who wrote
Yeah.
on Seinfeld as well, and has appeared in so many other films and TV shows. He's a classic comedian. He did a lot of work, I think, on Norm Macdonald's podcast before Norm Macdonald died.
Hmm.
But anyway, so yeah, I'm still working on it. I'm hoping to have the next episode out in the next few weeks, and I'm thinking that at the pace that this is going now, it's going to be like another 6 months before the whole story comes out. So it'll all come out this year, most likely. But it'll be like throughout the year.
All right. So yeah. that'll be exciting. I would remind myself to catch up on the whole thing because and also I really look forward to how you do the music of the show because it's an audio podcast, so the music is
Yes,
pretty much integral to the the show's production.
absolutely it is, because it has to, my goal for this whole thing was to have it feel like you're listening to a real episode of Seinfeld that slowly becomes a David Lynch film.
Hmm.
But in order for that to work, it's got to have music. And I've actually been lucky enough to contact several really talented composers that have been willing to work for like pennies, basically, because my
Oh
budget is
wow.
so small, to produce some amazing music for this stuff. If you go back and listen to part one, there's some theme music playing under the first scene, which is Jerry doing stand up, and it really sounds like, I mean, he took like one of Badalamenti's scores
Hmm.
and re-recorded it, and like completely interpolated and reconstituted it with like the slap bass and the percussion and the snaps and the mouth pops and that kind of stuff. Um, and it's very impressive. The work that this guy, Cody Vicori, and just a load of other very talented musicians have done to contribute to this thing.
Hmm. All right. So I have one last question for you, and that is, could you end this show the same way that you would end a Seinfeld and or Twin Peaks episode?
Uh, this show, meaning the series that I'm writing.
No, the this interview that we're doing. How would you end it?
Oh, how would I
No.
end it? Oh, let's see. Okay, so if this were an episode of Seinfeld, because I relate most heavily to George,
Uh-huh.
and if George were being interviewed for a podcast, I think what would have been happening throughout this interview is that I would be taking offense to little things that you have said that were meant to be compliments, but I would take them as insults, and I would get angrier and angrier, and I would end the episode by unleashing on you in some kind of monologue, like how dare you insult me, all this stuff, and then realize that you were complimenting me and totally embarrass myself, and like, I don't know, trip on my way out the door. um so that's how I would end this if this were Seinfeld. If this were an episode of Twin Peaks, um I would be hearing like a weird ambient electrical sound
Mhm.
throughout this interview that slowly grows louder and louder. And our connection would kind of fizzle out at times.
Mhm.
And I would realize, like, at a certain point, the screen would go dark. And then somehow we would switch bodies. And I would be in Vietnam and you would be in the United States. And I then have to navigate this world where I'm this totally other person, and I would just end it lost and confused and scared and mind blown. So that's probably how this would end.
Well, spoken like a true fan. Well, thank you. Thank you, Jesse Brooks, for being on this program. I wish you all the best, and I'll let you know what I think about the show so far, The Other Side of Darkness.
Chuang, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. This was a really fun conversation. I had a great
Yeah,
time.
yeah, I enjoyed
And
myself too.
just to speak to the interview itself, you do great work as an interview host. It's not an easy job, I can tell you, because I've done it a lot. And I remember, because I listened to an episode of your podcast this
Oh,
morning,
really?
so I understand you're only 18. Is that right?
I was born in '99, so that would make me 22
Oh, you're 20.
and
Oh, I must have
23.
listened to a really old episode then, because you've been doing this for a while.
I think
But I mean,
I started the show when I was 20-ish. So
oh, okay. Gotcha. Well, I mean, still, that's very young to be hosting a podcast and pulling in guests and constructing something like this on a regular basis. So kudos to you for doing this and finding something exciting for you, and learning how to be good at it. That's really cool.
yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I did started the podcast during the COVID lockdown.
Uh-huh.
It started out as a show where I talk about music. So I got a volunteer gig during doing radio for my local radio station when I was studying in Canada. I
Hmm.
So the pitch of the show was I would talk about the music that I like, mostly popular. So I would focus on an album, say Bob Dylan,
Hmm.
and I would riff on how that album impacted me and how I first got to it, and I would play several tracks of the album. of course, since it's Canadian radio, you would have to play certain selections from music made or composed and performed by Canadian artists. So there's that. But ever since the lockdown, I pivoted into doing podcasts. I did start out, doing the monologue thing, and then I would find musicians and later on, people who I find interesting. And of course, I include you as one of them. So it has taken the form as it is now.
That's awesome. Well, thank you. And if you ever want to have a music chat, I would love to talk about some of my favorite albums. I'm a big
Of
classic
course.
rock guy. You mentioned Bob Dylan. I'm a really big Bob Dylan fan. So I could talk for hours about the Beatles or Pink Floyd or Led Zeppelin. So yeah, I'm an open book there.
That'd be wonderful. Awesome, Jesse. Yeah. Thanks again for coming
All
on
right.
the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Take good care of yourself.
All right, you too. I'll talk to you later, Tron. Thanks again. Have a great day.